This is going to be a quick introduction to the course. We'll outline the key objectives of the course and also what you can expect throughout this course. This is a course on the myths of poker. We're going to be talking about myths players believed in the past about the game of poker. We're also going to be talking about myths that players still believe today. So there's going to be a nice mixture of learning about poker history. So if you are a relative newcomer to the game, you'll find out how players used to think about the game in the past, how that's evolved, how certain myths surrounding the game of poker were debunked. But also you'll learn about the persistent myths that many players believe today about the game. And in many cases, even some advanced players are propagating some of these myths surrounding the game of poker. The key objectives of the course are as follows. Key objective number 1, to encourage independent lateral thinking. In other words, we don't want to outsource all of our thinking to other players in the industry. We need to be able to think laterally by ourselves about certain poker concepts so that we can decide what makes sense and what doesn't make sense, which information we'll accept, which information we'll discard. Another way of expressing this is that we're encouraging the filtering of all information received from other players, no matter how good they're perceived to be at the game. So even if a very experienced high stakes player is giving us information about the game, we still need to think laterally about that information. There needs to be a filtering process in place where we say, okay, I'm going to accept 90% of what this player is telling me, but this 10% here, that doesn't actually tie in with objective reality about the game of poker. To all intents and purposes, it's a myth surrounding the game that perhaps many players believe, but we want to reject that particular myth in order to generate the highest win rates in the game. So throughout this course, you'll be able to sharpen your knowledge in commonly misunderstood areas of poker. Obviously, this is not going to be an exhaustive list of all of the various myths players believe, but it will give you examples of how to think laterally about certain concepts, what players believe, and why those ideas are inaccurate. So when you do come across other myths in the poker community outside the ones we discuss in this course, you'll be able to think objectively about whether those myths actually carry truth about the game of poker. Now, throughout the course, we'll be referencing various sources. We actually want to trace many of these myths back to some of their origins. And some of these sources are going to include high-profile poker players, authors, and forum posters. And we're not necessarily saying that these are bad players. Yes, in many cases, they might be propagating a specific myth about the game of poker, but the reality is that there are so many myths out there surrounding the game that many good players also get swept along with quite a number of these myths, and it's only after the evolution of time and study that those myths begin to disappear from a poker player's thought process. So we're always going to have some incorrect ideas about the game. This is a normal part of development, but obviously the more of those myths that we can debunk, then the larger the percentage of accurate thought processes we're going to have about the game of poker. So we're not discrediting any of the sources mentioned in this particular video series. We're simply highlighting that the myth does exist and seeing examples of how those myths have been propagated throughout poker history. So hopefully this should be an eye-opening and also entertaining poker course if you want to learn a little bit about our history as poker players. Thanks very much for checking out this introduction video, and I look forward to catching you guys in the rest of the course.